Soil Regeneration Part 2. Watch my YouTube channel for any other videos I've done. I'm going to be posting a lot more practical stuff in the coming months. I'm currently redesigning my allotment, and so I'll be incorporating a lot of the stuff that I've been learning over the last couple of years, and really I'm using it as a demonstration of what you can do in a small space. I think this is really important because not everyone's got access to a large amount of land, and the greatest thing about permaculture is you can grow a lot of food on a small space. There's a man called Graham Bell who lives on the Scottish borders, and he grows over a metric ton of food in a year on a fifth of an acre. He uses a technique called a food forest, which is a multi-layered system. So you're maximizing the amount of food or the yield you can get in a vertical sense. Okay, so we'll start off. So soil regeneration, or regenerating soil, it's all about bringing back the balance to our ecosystems. Fundamentally, we've destroyed pretty much all the biology in the soil through chemical application. And this has been pushed by big business, big pharma, big ag, government, because there's a lot of profit in chemical fertilizers, pesticides. And one of the main proponents, Monsanto, now known as Bayer, came up with a wonderful pesticide called glyphosate, which is an amino acid inhibitor, but also it's a carcinogen essentially. So it's creating a lot of problems both in the ecosystems, in water systems, throughout the food chain, and in ourselves. So it's really important to know this, because we need to know how to look at an ecosystem so we can observe it and understand the complexities of it, and then we can remediate it in the correct way. But there's so many caveats to this, and there's so much to explore. So I really want to kind of emphasize that there's a lot of information here, and it doesn't mean that you have to use any of it. It's just to consider it as a potential. But really the most important thing, if no one's growing food, I'm sure some of you are, just plant a seed. That's all you have to do. Watch it grow, build a relationship with your plants. That's the most important thing. So the ultimate aim that we have is to bring our site, whether it's our garden or a farm or a plant, in a pot, and bring it back to balance. Once we've done that through remediation, we can let nature do the work. People that dig over their gardens every year are missing a trick. One, because they're destroying the biology, but secondly, because they're putting in a lot of work that they don't need to put in. But it does take time for nature to claim itself back. And I'm not talking about rewilding, because that's something slightly different, but we can create a beautiful ecosystem for pollinators and other soil invertebrates and microbiology to establish a home. So what are healthy soils? What do they look like, feel like, smell like? So healthy soils are ones that are full of life. Healthy soils are ones that don't have any chemicals sprayed on them. They look like, well, the color is like a dark black to brown. You can see that it's healthy. If you drive past a lot of farmers' fields, there'll be light brown soil full of chunks where they've tilled them over, and there's virtually no life in them. And this isn't a rant at farmers, because I think farmers have really kind of been ostracized and not given enough credit for what they can actually produce. But also a lot of them are massively in debt, and they're subsidized, so they don't really have a choice than other to spray fertilizer on their land, because they've got to make a living. But there are farmers around the world that are actually starting to change this and start to switch over to regenerative techniques. There's a farmer in America, in North Dakota, called Gabe Brown, and he's really kind of leading the way. He's got 5,000 acres. So this can be done on a massive scale. And what does it feel like? When you get soil in your hands, it shouldn't feel clumpy. It shouldn't kind of run through your hands. It should be, you'll be able to squeeze it. It should have like structure to it, because that structure is made up of the humic compounds that are produced when organic matter is rotting down. And it should smell like a forest floor. That's really what we're aiming for. We're aiming for a beautiful, aromatic smell that doesn't smell acidic, doesn't smell like it's gassing off with nitrogen. When you get that kind of ammonia smell, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for something, when you smell it, it brings you joy, because our connection to soil goes so far back, and most of us have lost it. But I'm sure some of you know, if you walk out in nature, your senses become alive, and that's really what we're looking for. So what life is in there? There are many tests you can do to kind of understand. You can do things like pitfall traps to understand what life is in your soil. But if you just get on your knees and dig down, so on my allotment, I can see microarthropods, I can see worms. I'm sure if I got a microscope, I could see the microbiology in there. I can see mycelium developing. That's what we're aiming for. We're aiming to be able to see some of this life. I was over my allotment last week, and I was putting some new compost down, and the amount of worms was just ridiculous, like compared to last year, and that's what we're looking for. So, but the important thing to remember is everyone's context is different. So we need to think about what our context is. Some of us will have really degraded soil. Some of us might have weeds all over our soil. We need to think about the things like how much sun we get, how much rain we get, what might have been grown in there before. So before we remediate and restore our soil, we need to work out what's going on in the soil in the first place. So that's including the life in the soil, but also we can do tests such as, for anyone that was on the last webinar, we can do soil jar tests, and that will just literally give you an idea of what parent components the soil is made of. So how much clay, how much silt, how much sand is in there. Simple jar, you fill half of it up with soil, half of it up with water, leave a tiny little bit of an air gap in there, shake it up for 60 seconds, sit it on the side, and after about 2 days, you'll get the separation of the different materials. That will then give you an idea of how you need to remediate the soil, depending on what you want to grow in it. Because certain vegetables like clayey soil, others like more sandy soil. pH will make a difference to what will grow where. So to measure and evaluate is really important. This is something I kind of ignored in my first couple of years of growing, but don't let that put you off. We're here to make mistakes. That's how we learn. So leading on from this, what is your soil type? As I mentioned, the clay. Where I live in Essex, it's pretty heavy clay, but there is some loamy element to it. You can actually go on to a website called Soilscapes, and you can zoom in, it gives you a map, and it will tell you what your soil type is. And it will tell you, how permeable it is, whether it's clay, whether there's loam in it, whether it's acidic, whether it's alkaline. It's a really helpful tool. if you don't want to do a soil gel test. But a soil gel test will give you more of a specific site idea. So test your pH. You can buy pH meters, or you can buy those little test papers. All you need to do is just add water to the soil. If you've got a site, I suggest you test the soil pH in different areas, because the pH can change. So alkaline or acidic, we're always aiming for the ideal zone. So loamy soil is a combination of those three. You can get clay loamy, you can get sand loamy, you can get silt loamy, etc. And the ideal pH is 6.5 to 7. The reason we aim for this is because most plants can acquire most nutrients at that pH. However, with plant roots, they will actually be able to change the pH to a degree around the actual plant root. This area is called the rhizosphere. This is really fundamental because it means that plants are constantly changing the pH. So it means that we don't have to worry too much. We just need to get it into that bit. But this is obviously contextual. So if you own an orchard, you obviously don't want pH 7. You want it closer to 6.5. And again, you've got caveats in that as well. So the question, what do you want to grow? What's growing in that area already, if anything? If it's weeds, then it's likely that your pH is 7 and over. Weeds love pH 7 and over. This is where nitrates thrive, and weeds feed on nitrates. But that's an important question to ask yourself, because, you know, what do you like to eat? And obviously, if you're at the start of your growing kind of experience, then these are quite important questions to ask yourself. So soil organic matter, this is the engine of our plant growth. This is where all the magic happens. It's the catalyst. It's the catalyst and the home for microbiology and all living things connected to the soil. And the higher the soil organic matter, or SOM content, the healthier and more buffered our plants will be. And we really want to be aiming towards having a minimum of 5 to 10% soil organic matter. Most of our agricultural land has less than 2%. So you can imagine that the soil organic matter will really determine, well, it's the catalyst for how many nutrients the plants can uptake. Because the soil organic matter holds the biology, and it's the biology that actually gets the nutrients for the plants. So if we have low soil organic matter, we don't have much biology, which means that those nutrients in the soil will not be made available to the plant roots. This is why farmers spray their fields with NPK, because the plants can't access it, you know. So it's starting to change, but really I think the change is going to happen. The big change is going to happen locally, and this will kind of spread out to the farmers. But there are some remarkable people in the country that are reaching out to farmers and are doing tests on little bits of their land. There's a guy in Dorset who I know who's got a soil testing lab, and he's doing acres at a time, and he's testing the compost he's making and some of these methods with really good results. So really, nature is telling us what is going on and what we need to do. By seeing what plants are growing in that patch of land, nature is telling us something. By the pests that are eating the crops we grow, nature's telling us that those plants are sick. By the majority of the situations, pests only attack plants that are unhealthy. When a plant's unhealthy, it actually sends off a signal saying, eat me, I need to go back into the ground because I'm not going to be able to get to the reproductive stage. And even if I do, my seed isn't going to have a high genetic expression, So if we sit back and just observe, we can really see what nature is actually doing and what it's trying to tell us. So on to the good stuff, remediation methods and techniques. There are thousands and even more being created every day. I'm not a scientist. There are scientists out there which are doing really good work on micro remediation, which is mushroom remediation, creating biostimulants, biofertilizers. There are people that are selecting microbes from nature, combining them together. I'll show you one of those examples. But composting types. So if any of you are looking at making compost, then there's 3 different compost types, essentially. There's bacterial, fungal, and balanced. It's pretty self-explanatory. The higher the bacteria, the higher the pH will be. The higher the fungal component, the lower the pH will be. If we're looking at growing a selection of crops, what we're really looking for is a balanced compost. You can actually send your compost or your soil off to biolabs, which will tell you how many fungi, how many bacteria, and all the other microbiology you have in that sample. And when you're making compost, an important thing to consider is the carbon to nitrogen ratio. This will determine really whether it becomes fungal, balanced, or bacterial. The more carbon in it, the more fungal. That's fungal food, basically. Carbonaceous material is fungal food. This is why you get mushrooms that grow on logs and grow out of trees, because they feed on the decomposition of trees or woody material, lignin. So the higher, when you're making compost, if you want to make this, the higher the surface area, the quicker the material will break down. So if you're trying to compost logs, for instance, it's going to take ages to break down. But if you use wood chips, it'll be a lot quicker. When I've made compost in the past, I've used like hay, grass, weeds, manure. I chop it all up, apart from the manure. I chop it all up with a lawnmower, and that turns into tiny particles. What that basically means is that more microbiology will have a bigger surface area to break it down quicker. That's really essentially what we're looking for. So compost ingredients, these are, again, there's a lot more to it, but this is how we kind of break it down to simplify it. So you have browns, greens, manures. The combination and ratios you use will depend on what you want to achieve. Okay. So for instance, if you want to grow brassicas like pH around 7. So you might want to use more greens. But here is a list of the browns. So browns are dried out carbonaceous material that have completed their life cycle. So they have hardly anything in them apart from carbon, no nitrogen. So once a plant completes its life cycle, it goes from being green, which is usually an indication of high nitrogen, to brown. So all that list down there, cardboard, newspaper, paper, raw dust, hardwood and softwood bark, and the wood chips, they're all really good material that are high in carbon. Then we have our greens. So that's anything growing that hasn't completed its growing state. These are high in bacteria, high in endophytes, which are a type of bacteria, simple sugars and carbohydrates. And there's a list of all the materials that you can use. The more of those you'll use, the higher as you can see, the higher bacterial content it will be. But the important thing to remember about composting is there's no real set. These big companies that make a lot of composts will usually do it in big windrows, which are like big kind of mounds of compost, and they heat it up to destroy all the pathogens. But what it tends to do is leave it sterile, which is why you don't really get any biology in there. But they will have a really high pH. So their pH tends to range between 7 and 8. But the more diverse that we make our compost heaps, the more life will be in there. So all of that is kind of just important to remember when if you're thinking of doing that. And then your manures. So manures are used, or animal manures and byproducts are used as starters. So they are igniters, especially in hot compost. You want something that's going to heat the compost pile up really quickly. And this is what manure does. If you've ever walked past a farmer's field where a cow has just produced manure, you'll see it steaming. That's basically it gassing off with nitrogen, methane, etc. I've used all of these apart from duck and pig, and they've all worked. What I would just consider is if you're making a compost pile, what I did was I got organic manure. Well, everything was organic that I used. But certain things, especially horses, they get wormed a lot and they have a lot of antibiotics. The problem with that is there's these chemicals and drugs which you don't really want in your compost. So that's important to remember. I've used lots of these as well. So seeds, fruits and flowers. Seeds obviously have got all the energy required for annual plants production. And fruit and flowers are high in phosphorus, nitrogen and other essential nutrients. And they've got a huge amount of sugars. And because obviously they've come to the end of their cycle, they have a higher microbial content as well. So when I did composting end of 21 or summer 21 is when I first started getting into it. I used a lot of weed seeds and flowers like daisies and dandelions, things like lamb's quarter, which is like a lot of people consider it to be a weed, but it's actually got 8 of the amino acids that humans can't produce. It's related to quinoa. And these will just add so much diversity, because whenever we're growing or composting or anything, what we're looking for is as much diversity as we possibly can. If we just keep it really simple, anyone, this is what all the big compost companies are doing. So we want to try and make it as unique as possible. And then this is kind of going on from the browns. There are lots of ways of doing just woody or high lignin material composts. You can literally do this. It takes a long time to break down, but it can create really, really good compost. So they're the materials. It's just kind of an overview. There's a lot more out there that you can use, but it's just to give you an idea of what can be done. So composting methods, there's, again, this list isn't complete. There's loads and loads of ways to do composting. There's more being created every day. Some people are combining them. So the thermophilic, the hot composting, I've done this. It's really quick. It takes about 30 days. But what we're starting to learn now is that will be very high in bacteria. If you want a balanced compost, you want to let that sit for about another 2 months. you can inoculate it or add things that will help it to become more fungal. But if you're looking to make compost really quick, it's a great way to do it. But you need to put in a lot of work. I was turning mine every 5 days, and in order for it to get hot enough, you need about a cubic meter and quite a lot of muscle to turn it. But it is fun. I had fun doing it. And then mouldering compost, you see these on allotments. It is literally just put on lots of stuff into, a compost bin that's made out of pallets. It takes a year, sometimes less, sometimes more, to break down. These sometimes produce some of the best composts, but it's always a gamble because there's a lot of factors that will determine how it turns out. The Johnson Su bioreactor, or beam as it's known, produces the most diverse compost and the best compost you can get that's ever been made. It's made by a guy called Dr. Johnson and his wife. I can't remember her first name, but her second name is Sue, obviously. And it is a combination of the thermophilic composting and mouldering compost. It's done in massive vats. They can be 5,000 litres, which is huge. But what they do is usually made out of, it could be made out of the same materials, manure, woody stuff, green stuff. You can even have veg and fruit in there. And you layer it, and then you stick tubes in it, and that will aerate it. Those tubes are no more than 18 inches apart, and they're perforated, so they have holes in them. That makes sure that the compost doesn't go anaerobic, because that is a quick way to create pathogens. But pound for pound, it's the highest bacterial content, the highest fungal content, and they're winning awards, and everyone wants to make it once they see it. There are calculations that around a pound of this will treat about half an acre of land, and it literally it's like magic on your soil. Then there's EM composting, so that's effective microbes composting. I'll get into the effective microbes a bit later. You can use EM composting on the thermophilic composting, and what that essentially does is it means you don't have to turn the pile as much, because it stops it from going anaerobic. The microbes will actually prevent any pathogens from taking hold. And then you've got vermicomposting, which is worm composting. I do this. I do it in big bathtubs. That's like kind of mouldering compost to a degree, because you don't really do much. You just stick in your stuff, and the worms do it for you. And as long as you've got the right worms that are indigenous to this country, after they've composted it for you, you can then just stick it on your raised beds, or wherever you're growing food, and they'll continue to dig it in for you. Then you have bokashi. This is from Japan. This is actually a fermented way of composting. It's been in Japan for decades, and they use it to compost bones, meat, dairy, all sorts of stuff. It's quite strict this way, because it's fermented. You have to follow a particular process. Otherwise, there's a danger that you can have a big kind of problems with pathogens. And then one of my favorites is a Hugelkultur. And this is Austrian German term, and it basically means earth mound. There's lots of different ways of doing it. And what you do is you get big logs that are rotting already, put smaller sticks on them, then you can put grass, compost, all sorts of stuff, and it builds a big mound. what that does is makes compost over years and years, but you can actually plant stuff in the top of it. So you can, what we call in permaculture, it's called stacking functions. And it's a really, really good way of building compost and growing food at the same time. And using waste material that you might have, you know, if you've had to kind of either cut down a tree or prune a tree, it's a great way of using stuff that might not work in other composting ways. Okay, so questions to ask yourself. What is your situation and what materials can you obtain? This is really important. Because not everyone's going to want to do thermophilic composting. Some people want to do mouldering compost. What is your climate? Hot composting won't really work as well if you live in somewhere like Scotland. You can still do it, but you'd have to make the pile bigger because you need a bigger volume to heat stuff up. And then how much time, finances, and room do you have? As I said, not everyone has a farm. Some people might just want to do worm composting. You can do them in little bins or big baths. I mean, professionally, they do it in massive, massive windrows again. And what do you want to grow? You know, depending on what you want to grow, you might want to make a slightly more bacterial compost or a slightly more fungal compost. So these are questions I ask myself as well. And remember, we're always aiming for the ideal zone, 6.5 to 7 pH, obviously context dependent. And this is why it's really important to measure your site before you choose your approach. It doesn't mean that you can't try these things. I've tried all sorts and some of them haven't worked. It can be frustrating at times, but these things are there for experimenting. And as I said, there's so much to experience and explore in the world of regenerative, a natural way of life, you know. I just want to, you know, kind of going off on tangent slightly. We're kind of entering quite an unknown phase at the moment in humanity's history. There's lots of stuff going on that's out of our control. And my personal opinion is if we don't localize stuff, then we'll lose even more control. And the best way to localize is to build community. And the best way, in my opinion, to build community is equip yourself with as much knowledge as possible. And the best teacher is nature. All our inventions have come from observing nature. Everything has, you know, otherwise we'd have no reality. And all I'm doing is I'm just passing information on to people, you know. So and the same as the guy that I learned from, Matt Powers, he learned from, you know, and it's transmitting this truth of what nature is essential in my opinion. And I know from my experience and other people I know, when you connect with nature, you feel better, you know. It took me a lot to start doing these webinars because I really don't like technology, but I felt it was really important. Hence why I'm here. So mineral amendments, there are lots of caveats to this, and we can go into more detail on another webinar if this is what people want. But volcanic rock dust, liquid seaweed, Hebridean seaweed is probably the best out there that we can get hold of in this country, or the UK rather. Ocean water. With the ocean water, you need to be really careful, because I know some of you might have read a lot about sewage being dumped in the estuary, the Thames estuary, and other places around the coast of England. So that might be a no-no. You can test it. And then homemade preps. There's a type of natural farming called Korean natural farming, one of the preps there is called water soluble calcium. It's really easy to make. You just need eggshells and vinegar. The vinegar strips the calcium from the eggshells, and you basically have liquid calcium. You can do this. There's loads of different preps you can do, and they're really easy. I've done quite a few myself with some really good results. But all of these, especially the volcanic rock dust and the liquid seaweed, they are full of micronutrients. And here are some of the micronutrients that they contain. So the calcium, sodium, iron, cobalt, boron, zinc, copper, most of those there are pretty much deficient in our soils, or they're unsoluble. So it means that the plants can't access them. So adding these minerals, whether it's going to be to your compost or straight to your soil, or even spraying them on the leaves, you can do that as well, foliar sprays, will give that boost that plants might need at particular stages of their growth. You know, so obviously they have a vegetative growth, then they have a part where their seeds come through, and then when they flower, and then when they fruit. Knowing what we need to add at particular times really helps. But we can combine a lot of these together to give our plants an immune boost. And what that does is that prevents the less potential of pests eating your food, or viruses and diseases taking control of the plants. So applications, as I said, you can add them to your compost piles, you can water it directly onto soil. I've added both rock dust and Hebridean seaweed to my compost piles. There's a company that does all this stuff, which I can tell you guys about. If you want, just email me. You can use them as foliar sprays. You can use them to inoculate seeds. This is a really good way. I'm doing some of this year actually, is to inoculate seeds, because if you give them the start when they need, right at the beginning, just like when a baby's born and it's have its mother's milk, it has the nutrients they need in there to become strong and healthy. And you can also combine them with bioinoculants and fertilizers. So there's lots of different ways you can kind of get this into the ecosystem. Making biochar. This stuff is amazing. It's been around for a long time. Our ancestors in the Amazon were doing it. There are reports of the Aborigines doing it. But biochar is essentially charred woody material. So whether that's cut timber, dried logs, they do need to be dry, less than 10% moisture. And you create this through a process called pyrolysis, which is essentially where you burn stuff with very low oxygen. By the way, it's really easy. I've done it. You can do it in many different ways. You can build a kiln out of rocks. You can get an oil barrel, cut the top off it, do it that way. Or you can do what you call a conservation burn, which is where you almost build a fire and you light it from the top and it will burn down. Doesn't create a lot of smoke. So obviously depending on your situation. And then as the wood is burning, or the woody material is burning, after it turns black and before it gets to the ash stage, you quench it with water. And then you can then spray either compost tea or effective microbes on it, or other biofertilizers, because what you're trying to do is all that material that's burnt, you want to populate it with microbes. I'll explain why in a bit. But essentially, biochar is one of the best things you can add to soil, or compost piles. It does so many different things. you'd be quite surprised. I suggest you research biochar if it's something you're interested in, because it's quite phenomenal. So biochar holds 3 times the amount of water for its weight, 3 times the amount of water that soil will. It acts as a home for microbiology. So if anyone knows about activated charcoal, similar to that, but it's not quite as good, because activated charcoal is done professionally through other processes. But if you get a bit of biochar about that big, that will be the equivalent. If you spread all of that out, it will be about 10 square meters, which is quite big. And it's because it's full of loads of little micropores. And in those micropores, when you inoculate it or you induce it with microbiology, that biochar will act, or those tiny little micropores will act as a home for the microbiology. And something they've discovered recently is an electrical conduit. So they're actually testing out biochar to use as semiconductors. It's, in my opinion, it's phenomenal. It's just what nature does is just amazing. So the applications for biochar, it can be added to compost piles. You can spread it directly on soil. You can combine it with mineral and biological amendments. And one of its probably most important applications is water retention. So you can use it to hold on to water. And when you have a drought, it will release that water gradually. And also when you have floods, you know, there's loads of stories where people have added biochar and the biochar is soaked up that excess water. So it's amazing stuff. And then on to biological amendments. So compost teas, as I mentioned, and compost extracts, and EM, affected microbes, and mycorrhizal fungi. So compost teas and extracts, compost teas are basically created through aerating. You get homemade compost, you put it into a bag that's got micropores in it, and you put it in a bucket that's filled with water, ideally rainwater. You don't really want any water that's got any contaminants in it, so no tap water unless you want to filter it, or you can leave it out and that will disperse the chlorine from it. So you use a little pump like you would in a fish pond. Like a 5 amp one is fine for like a 20-litre bucket. I use a beer brewing bucket because I don't drink beer, so there's no point. And you aerate it for between 24 and 48 hours. And what you're basically doing is you're stripping the microbiology out of the compost into the water, and it's basically liquid compost. It's really effective. And then you can use that to spray on your soil before you plant plants in the soil, or you can use it to spray on the leaves, or even straight into the flower. This again gives the plant this microbiology, which strengthens its immune system, and protects it from disease, pests, etc. And compost extracts are similar, but there you passively run water through the compost, whether it's the compost pile or you run it through like a sieve. Does the same thing really. Compost extracts are better for foliar sprays than they are for soil soaks, but it's essentially the same microbiology. So that's really cool. And an effective microbe, something I've recently got into. It's been about 6 months I've been kind of testing out with this. This was created by a guy called Dr. Higa, and he worked out that there were free living microbes all around us, especially in the soil, that when put together would create this effective microbe solution. So it's lactic acid bacteria, which you can make from rice, which is insane. I've done that. I did that a couple of years ago. And it ends up separating like curds and whey. You can even use the curds to make cheese, and the liquid solution becomes your lab. They actually use lab in pig farms to keep the smell down, but it's also an effective microbe. And then photosynthetic bacteria, also known as PNSB, that actually is produced in worm guts, in compost worm guts. So you can actually get it from compost, vermicompost as well. And then you have yeast and other bacteria, and a thing called actinomycetes, which is a type of endophytic bacteria. And that you can sometimes see it growing. It's like white filaments. It looks a bit like mycelium, but it's not. I buy this from this website here. You can scale it up using a couple of other things. It's really simple. I'm actually going to be doing a video on it next week. So if you check out my YouTube channel, and just try it, like it's just fun, you know. It costs probably, the whole lot will probably cost you about 50 quid to make. But if you spray that on your soil, like your plants are going to absolutely love it. And as I said, like, I don't want anyone to feel like they need to do this, but just these are just ideas for people to explore if they want to. So probably the cheapest way and the longest standing way of remediating soil is cover crops and mulching. So humans have been doing this ever since we've been engaged in agriculture, which is a long time. Cover crops or green manure, these are things you grow like alfalfa, vetch, red crimson, red clover. There's a host of them, but they're ground cover essentially. So usually no higher than like a couple of inches, but they're really good at fixing nitrogen, fixing carbon. And once they're fully grown and they've gone through their life cycle, you can cut them down and they act as mulch. So one of the most important things about soil, taking care of soil, is always to keep the soil covered. When you don't, you get erosion, or you have these swings in temperature. And this is what mulch has been used for ages. So these swings in temperature, especially in clay soil, will make the soil move. So it cracks the soil. It can compact it because you're just going through these temperature shifts all the time. And also it retains the moisture. So any water that does fall down, that mulch or even the cover crops will stop that moisture from evaporating so quickly. And you can use so many things as mulch. You can use cardboard, straw, paper, vegetable scraps, grass clippings, and it's kind of a way of composting as well. There is an extension to this which is called sheet composting or sheet mulching, when you layer manure, grass clippings, lots and lots of different things, and that all kind of breaks down over time. So there's so many things out there that you can use, and there's something for everyone, in my opinion. And mycorrhizal fungi, pretty much everything, all of life has come from this relationship to fungi. There's still a lot of research that's gone into it, but the mycorrhizal fungi, or also known as arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, these are the hyphae, so the little strands, the white filaments that are underground. They all form a relationship with plant roots. Some go into the plant roots, actually into the cell of the plant root. Some will just wrap around it. but over 90% of the plants on the planet have this relationship, especially in forests. Most of these mycorrhizal fungi have actually been destroyed by our farming practices, and they can take a long time to kind of come back into creation. So whatever we can do to establish this relationship is like really important. And the greatest thing about fungi in general, just as a side note, is it can be used for so many different remediation techniques. They actually use it, they've been using it at Chernobyl to remediate the radiation. They've used it on glyphosate to basically take the glyphosate out of the soil, and then you compost the mushrooms. And also they're using it for cancer. You know, things like turkey tail mushroom are really amazing. There's a guy called Paul Stamets. His mother had cancer, and she was taking turkey tails cancer, and she went into remission, and the tumor disappeared. So there's so many different things. And mushrooms have been around longer than most life forms on this planet. So hail the mushrooms, I say. And we can add them to compost piles, compost teas, directly to the soil. But the most important thing is, because they have this relationship with the plant roots, they need to be in contact with plant roots. You can add them to your compost as long as you're quickly doing that. You might even be able to add them to a mouldering compost pile if you've got seeds in there and the seeds grow. That could be something that can happen as well. I've seen that in compost piles I've made. And one last thing, I heard of this a little while ago, but I never really looked into it. But it kept coming up. A couple of people mentioned it to me, so I thought I'd look into it. So some of you might have heard of electroculture. It's simply a technique of harvesting energy from the sun and the wind that's actually in the air. Some of you might know that the ionosphere holds a positive charge, the earth holds a negative charge. This is why lightning hits us. It's through a plasma discharge actually, but that's another story. But you know, Tesla knew that there was electricity in the air. He knew. This is why he built all these different mechanisms and machines to harvest it. And you can actually, people are now using these, they're creating aerials out of copper and things like zinc, sticking them in the ground and creating a kind of a conduit between the air and the ground and putting electricity into the ground. It looks like through some tests that the results are increasing yields by about 200%, which is remarkable. And the plants are growing a lot quicker. And it's possible because everything's electromagnetic, you know, and there's lots we don't know about. You know, this is the amazing thing about what I'm looking into, and is that plants actually do this anyway. So this is what I kind of wanted to bring up, is plants are taking electromagnetic energy from the sun. The mitochondria in the plants are transforming it into carbohydrates. And when we eat the plants, our mitochondria are transforming that back into electrical charge. We all work on electrical energy, you know. The sugars and the carbohydrates are merely a part of that process. So yeah, look into electroculture if you can. But one kind of caveat, or not caveat, but one side note to this is that if we increase the health of our soil, we won't need electroculture. The plants can do this themselves. In a lot of tests, there's a guy called John Kempf. is an American guy, but his research is showing that plants are nowhere near their capability of photosynthesis. It can be up to 600% more than it is now. Because the soil holds a charge, it means that there's already that capability in the soil. So yeah, lots of information there. I hope you got something from it. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I will stop sharing my screen. And then if anyone does have a question, then please go ahead. If you can't think of any now, feel free to email me and I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have. So, yeah.
Hi, I've got a question if you can hear me.
Yeah, sure, go for it. How you doing?
I use the Bokashi method of composting, and I put in a lot of citrus fruit peel. And the pH of my soil is 7. And I wondered if the content of the Bokashi bin is influencing the pH of the soil. 7.5 it is.
Yeah, I mean, what else have you got in the bucket?
Oh, all sorts of vegetable greenery and eggshells, and there's no meat or fish things, but it's all vegetables or fruit.
Yeah, so I would say that's the reason the pH is high. Although citrus peel is acidic by nature, or citrus fruits are acidic by nature, the rest of those materials are going to be keeping that pH high. But I mean, what are you using, like your own method, or are you using like have you bought the Bokashi bucket itself?
Yeah, I bought the Bokashi bucket and the Bokashi brown.
Okay.
So I'm following the method.
Yeah. Okay. Is this the first time you've done this?
Yes. What I haven't done, which I think is a good idea that you just suggested, is testing the pH at different points in the soil.
Yeah.
You know, around the garden.
Yeah. I would do that. I can, because Bokashi isn't something I've done before. So, but I do have access to information which I can probably find out what you might be not doing that you could do that would bring that pH down. But it depends.
Yeah,
I mean, what are you looking to use once the Bokashi's process is done? What are you looking to do with the
that's another
material?
good question, because this is year 1 of putting it on. So I was just sort of experimenting with seeing what happened when I did. So I'm not thinking at the minute of any vegetables in that area of the ground, but and anyway, I'm moving house. But it's just like for future thinking, should I be putting other stuff in the Bokashi bin, or putting the Bokashi mix into a bigger compost area and putting in the brown stuff as well?
Okay, yeah, you could do that. If you're using a bucket, it should actually do the process, but I've heard that you can bury it in the ground. Have you heard of that before?
Yeah, I have, yeah.
Yeah, so that's something to consider. I'll tell you what, Naomi, I will look into it, and you've emailed me, haven't you? So I can,
yeah, I have, yeah. That'd be
I can
brilliant.
send you, I'll have a look into it, and I'll send you the information I've got, because there's a couple of people I know that have done this with good results.
Okay, perfect.
So
Thank you so much.
That's okay,
Great.
No worries. Thanks for the question. Hi, Sophia.
Yeah, hi, Tom. Hi.
You okay?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Good.
I think you said that if you have a lot of weeds, your pH probably is high, around 7.
That's correct, yeah.
But what do you mean by weeds?
Well, good question. A weed is something that you don't want growing in an area where you want something growing. Some people consider dandelions to be a weed. I don't.
I don't. I eat
no.
dandelions
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah. So if
better.
you've got too many of that particular thing and you want to grow something else, then I would consider that to be a weed, because if it's inhibiting your ability to grow what you want, then it's something you don't want. So that's my classification of a weed. You know, does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, grass, I suppose. Grass is mainly that
Okay.
I consider weed myself.
Yeah. So, I mean, is there anything you're considering growing there? Do you want to grow anything else in that area?
Yes, obviously. I mean, I would like the grass, especially around like fruits and berries and stuff like that.
Okay.
I think they inhibit. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I would check what type of grass it is, because depending on the type of grass it is because if it's like couch grass or couch grass, as some people say, they've got a really kind of intricate root system, so that'll prevent a lot of stuff growing, and it can also inhibit, if you're looking at planting fruit bushes or fruit trees, that's going to inhibit it. The grass roots will inhibit those trees from taking hold in the soil. So you can do a couple of things. I never suggest too much digging, but I know you've got an allotment. Is this on your allotment?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can dig it over to get out the grass, and then what you want to do is test the soil, or you can test the soil before. You want to find out what the pH is, basically.
What is for berries? Do you know about?
It depends what type of berries, but you want to be under pH 7. So anything that produces fruit, or anything that's got a lot of lignin, so woody plants, require a pH of it depends on the type and the variation, but around 6.5 to 6.8. Okay. That's their pH. That's the pH that they like. Things like blueberries, that goes even lower, but mainly fruit of that type will be in the 6.4 to 6.8 range. It will change slightly. So you need to know what your pH is first, because if your soil's too alkaline, you can add stuff to it to bring that pH down. So what I would do is I would test your pH on different parts of the allotment. Yeah. Work out what the lowest one is, and pick that area as the area that you want to put your fruit bushes in.
They're already there.
Oh, they're already there. Oh,
they are
right,
already
okay.
there. The bushes, they are already there, but some of them they are doing well, or some not.
Okay.
So,
right.
Okay. Maybe it's because of the pH. So,
yeah. We'll do the test anyway, and then it gives you an idea. I would. There's a lot of factors that can influence why something is doing well and why it's not. Some of those fruit bushes that aren't doing well, they could potentially have a disease or something like that. Not saying that's it, but I would start with testing the soil, and then once you find out, email me and I can tell you what you can add on what you can do.
I mean, because of the webinar, I covered a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And if the pH is too high, how you can lower it a little bit?
So there's lots of stuff you can
What
do.
what you can add there in order to lower around?
Yeah, sure. So you can add manure to it, like
Okay.
fresh manure, any organic matter. So anything like woody, anything with high carbon. Yeah. So when I talked about the browns, you can add that type of thing. That will help lower it. Things like coffee grinds can help to lower the pH as well. You can, it'll be hard because I'm just trying to think, because you can add like fungally dominant compost, but it's really difficult to get hold of. So EM will work. So effective microbes, as I talked about, you can buy from that website that I mentioned on one of the slides. You can buy a litre bottle for about £20, and what you do is you mix it with molasses. Blackstrap molasses are the best, and water, and you can turn it into, you ferment it in a whatever size, 5 litres or 20-litre bucket, airtight. I can send you the actual thing by email, yeah. And after 5 to 7 days, that would have fermented, and then you can use it in a spray bottle and spray it, soil soak the area. That will help to bring down the pH. It's not going to happen straight away because nature takes time, and you might have to do a few different things to help it to get that pH down. But that will help. But the first thing to do is test your pH, and you can go from there. So if you, I can send you the ingredients you need, and then a couple of other suggestions as well. But whatever's available to you, Sophie. I know, as I said, coffee grinds work well, animal manure works well. The problem with animal manure, I always warn people, is you kind of got to know where you're getting it from, and they're not giving the animals antibiotics. You know this yourself, right? All this poison they put into animals, because that's going to affect your plants as well, and your plants can suffer from that. So it's always important to kind of be aware of that. But I think EM will probably be one of your best bets, and it's a chance to experiment as well.
Do you have any idea when you buy like organic manure, if it is, I mean, are you safe from there or not really?
Well, I get mine from my local area, so it wouldn't really work. The best thing to do is you just have to research. You have to find out any local farms in the area. I mean, there's a, what's the farm called? It's in Finchley. It's near the A406. There's a farm. It's like it's a college farm or something like that.
Oh,
it's like a strip of land. I'll ask Monica, and I'll send.
I think I know which.
You know, because I don't know whether they do, but they've got cows. They might, that might be organic.
They have horses as well sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To check.
Yeah,
I would just do some research into, you know, how I found mine was I went on Gumtree, and the woman that was selling it was advertising it there.
Okay.
Or you can sometimes find, like, another place I found it was through, it's not going to be in this area, but it was like an organic group, organic farmers and organic growers, and people were advertising chicken manure, cow manure on there. That's another route. It will probably take a bit of investigation to find out, And then it's really just having a phone call and saying, because a lot of these farmers, they just want to get rid of their manure, you know, because it just builds up. But always ask the questions: do they feed them antibiotics? What worming techniques have they got? All that type of stuff, because they will probably affect plants to a degree. So
Thank you.
that's okay, no worries.
Hi, John.
Hello, Robin.
Hello, how are you?
How you doing?
Yes, no, I'm well.
Long time no see.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't know if I missed that at the beginning. Did you explain how to inoculate seeds?
No, you didn't miss it. So it depends on what you want to inoculate them with.
Right.
You
No, I was just picking up on what you were saying about inoculating seeds.
Sure. So really, inoculating seeds is really simple. You basically just soak them.
Ah.
So you can do, depending on the type of seed, you can do this like for 12 hours, overnight, for 24 hours.
Right.
So you can do it with things like EM or compost tea. They're probably the best things to do it with. But what you're trying to do is basically protect the seed at its early stages of life, and give it an immunological boost. But you need to have the compost tea or the EM in order to do that. You can, I don't know what else would work actually, but you need those types of things to be able to inoculate it, because you need, what you're doing is basically putting biology on the coating of the seed. So the seed is basically feeding off that biology. So how you grow seeds in normal compost is those seeds are feeding off the nutrients in the compost. It works in the same way. Yeah. But you're just, some people even spray their seeds with compost tea or extract. Thanks, Faye. And yeah, so it's really just about bringing that biology and wrapping the biology around the seed, so the seed can interact with those microbes and get a better start in life. Is that all right? Cool, excellent. Cool. So if there are any other questions, then feel free. If you think of anything else, just email me. You know, if anything else comes up, just give me an email. I usually respond within a day or two, depending on how busy I am. But yeah, been really cool. I'll just check the chat just to make sure
I just wanted to ask you, John, I mean, today you cover really a lot of stuff, and I don't know how can I process this information, because it was so dense that I don't think I can do much with it.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, I mean, some because of my own experience, I have some idea, but a lot of stuff I didn't. I have to really go back to whatever you said and look myself bit by bit. And maybe it will be better if break it down on things like, for example, compost.
Yeah,
how we
sure.
do compost, or how we enhance the soil.
Yeah. Brilliant.
It's like a little bit more breaking down, we can be more practical as well in a way.
Certainly, and I do aim to do that. Okay. So my purpose, Sophia, was obviously I'm very conscious I don't want to overload people, but at the same time I want feedback. You know, I want people to tell me what they want, because I could do a whole webinar on compost, a whole webinar on mineral amendments, but I need to I want to put the feelers out there to see what people are engaged with and what they want. I'm happy to do a whole thing about how to compost, you know, and I can do those as separate videos or separate webinars. That's all good. I'm happy to do that. It's just because everyone wants something different. Some people like a lot of information, some people just like it in little bits, some people like to see the bigger picture. So I can definitely, I know a guy called Robert, he wanted me to do composting as well, but I thought I'd give something for everyone, because some people might be like,
composting, it was an example. It's not only composting that is interesting. All of it, whatever you said today, it is interesting me, but it was too much to make a use of it, because it was a lot of things that new, or maybe I just started scratching the surface of it, although I have few years I have the allotment. But still, that doesn't mean I know a lot of things. I'm still learning, you know, I'm learning from experiencing more. And then I look as well on YouTube and things like that. But yeah, I thought maybe just to let you know that I don't know if other people, they feel the same, but I like what you say. I just want to be able to kind of use it more. And if I think you break it down, then maybe we can more have an interaction as well.
Sure, yeah. No, it's great. Thank you for the feedback. Yeah, I'm more than happy to do that. It's very difficult, because I mean, one thing you can do is look back at the recording just to digest it a little bit more. I'm quite new to this. This is only my third webinar.
Yeah,
so, you know, I'm looking for feedback because I want to provide a service for people, you know. I want people to engage with it and understand, but it's kind of a test as well, you know.
Okay. To get to this point, to present that today, you didn't learn all this in one day.
No.
It took you several years digging and digging, because obviously you're interested to do really good. And all of us, we are obviously interested, we have our own experience. But it takes years, you know, because I don't have any background. I started myself, most of us anyway. And even if we had background, maybe we have a bad background, you know, of what's going on. So what I meant to say that we can't learn all this in one day.
No, of course not.
From one day.
No,
so that I mean that we probably need to break it down, so we actually be more useful, put it down in practice in a way.
Yeah, cool. Excellent. I will be doing that, so don't worry.
Okay, thank you.
I'll go into more detail of the processes and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Wicked. Thanks for the feedback, Sophia.
Yeah, perhaps even you know where you find these products. If you have some like links that you may suggest for people to have a look and explore.
Yeah, I can. What I'll do is I can send the links out to people of where I get the products that I use. And yeah, I will I'll take that into consideration for my next webinar to try and make it a little bit more accessible. The thing is, Sophia, is because I love this so much, I'm like a sponge. I just absorb really quickly, but it's my thing. It's the thing that I love the most in the world, you know. So it's a lesson, and it's an experience for me to try and adapt the way I pass on this knowledge to people.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's cool. Thank you. Brilliant.
No,
All right, cool.
I think the way you're doing it is great, John. I think you've got a really good mix of stuff that we can access easily, stuff that we would have to research, stuff that we've probably not heard of. And so it's a really good mix of information, I think.
Thanks, Robin. Thank you. I want to cater for everyone. You know, I want to try and make it as overreaching as possible, because I know everyone learns in a different way. But it's a challenge, you know. So, but it's great. It's a great experience for me, because this is what I want to do. I want to teach people, you know. I believe it's my purpose in life. So I'm willing to
I think
cater to you, cater to Sophia.
Yeah.
So that's really good.
This brilliant experience for you.
Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm getting so much from, I'm learning more about the subjects myself, because as I talk about it more, I learn about it in a different way, you know.
Yeah.
Like Sophia said, going into more detail and breaking it down is going to help people solidify it in a different way. So
and
yeah, brilliant.
Before you go, what heat mats would you recommend?
Are you talking about for like suppressing weeds and things like that?
No, for early planting. So you know, a heat mat.
Oh, a heat mat. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I thought you said a sheet mat.
Oh, sorry. No.
I can send you. I'll send you a link of the one that me and Monica got, because we got 4 of them.
Oh, really?
I think they're about £14 each, but they're really good. They germinate the seeds like within a couple of days. So
really? Gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Lovely.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Is that you cover your seeds so they grow and they don't affect it from the cold, you mean?
Yes, and they're like heat mats, so that you plug them into the mains, and they're like a mat, and then you put them in a little propagator.
Oh, you do it at home, that?
Yeah, so it just keeps the heat. I think it does it to about 20 degrees, something like that. So especially for things like tomatoes, peppers, aubergines, squash, they all need like high germination temperatures. So they're really good for that, because the weather as it is at the moment, you can't guarantee to get things germinated, even in a greenhouse, you know. So having these little heat mats are a really good way of just getting them to the seedling stage, you know. It's really good. So I can send you both that link if you want.
Is it special for germination or?
Yeah, basically, yeah. It's just for germinating the seeds. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So cool.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks very much, guys.
Take care, John.
See you soon. Yeah.
Yeah. Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.